Grab a brew, listen up, and get back to you. This is Things I Wish I'd Known podcast.
Hello and welcome to Things I Wish I'd Known, the podcast with your host, Rachael, where we share positive change to help you in your life. I am here today with somebody who I really love very, very much, and I can't wait to introduce you guys to her. Her name is Claire Koryczan, and she is a coach, mentor, speaker, and strategist who works with mainly entrepreneurs and leaders, and that's kind of how we met, basically. We work from the same co-working space, and we just have these really awesome conversations. And one day I said to her, Claire, do you know what? You're going to have to come on the podcast because these conversations need to be recorded. And so here we are. So Claire, thank you so much for coming. It's so nice to see you.
Oh, thank you, Rachael, for inviting me to come and talk on your podcast today.
Well, do you want to just introduce yourself? Because I know there's quite a lot that you do and your background is really interesting and diverse, and I think you'll be able to explain it better than I can. So do you want to just introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, thanks, Rachael. Somebody asked me the other day at a networking event, who is Claire? And I found that a really interesting question because normally people ask you, what do you do? You know, tell me a bit about your background. And when I was reflecting on that question, what came to me was around, actually, I'm all about understanding people, why we do the things that we do. And actually, ever since I was a teenager, I've always been really interested in psychology, humanity, sort of understanding the constructs of how we relate to one another, and also how much we learn about ourselves. And that's been the common thread throughout my career. And if I look back over my career, 22 years, the first decade was spent in the creative industries. I then went into technology and innovation, and then subsequent to that, working in the people space. And that human thread has been the thread that has run all the way through. And 3 years ago, I set up Imagine Beyond, my business, which is really the fundamentals around that are around helping leaders, founders, and HR professionals to think more creatively and explore new possibilities with excitement. And I do that on a day-to-day basis.
And I love that about you, because one of the key sort of topics that we talk about a lot, right, is curiosity. Mm-hmm. And I think around that, like asking people to kind of approach things with a bit more creativity, a bit more curiosity is really powerful. Yeah. It's something that I think, even though we both work in quite, I guess, different spheres, that's where what we do crosses over. You know, I ask my clients to really connect to curiosity around their emotions, around their thoughts, around why they do what they do. Like, why have you got that behavior that you don't like? Why have you? And I think, you know, that's something that we both find quite fascinating, isn't it? Is why do we behave in the ways that we behave, and how can we be more curious about that so that we can, I guess, build more self-awareness and grow, you know, transform and feel like we're being, I don't know, you know, that whole thing around like being the best version of yourself.
Yes.
But I sort of like low-key hate that language as well. You know, when you're like, oh, because I sort of want to say, oh, be your best self and live your best life. And then I'm like, oh, God, it just sounds like one of those awful, I don't know, like live life, live, laugh, love, or whatever that you're going to stick on your kitchen wall.
Like a positive mantra, isn't it?
So I need a better word for it. So if anyone has a better way of saying those things, feel free to email in. So tell me, Claire, you've had quite interesting career trajectory over 22 years. But I love that question, like, who is Claire?
Yeah.
How has your life experience kind of threaded through your work?
Well, it's taken me about the best part of 2 decades to actually figure out what it is that is you know, that is my gift to the world, that is my purpose. And when I look back on those teenage years and that curiosity around understanding people, and that's where it all began. And I think back to a brilliant speech that Steve Jobs did at Stanford, where he talks about following your curiosity and intuition. And actually, it's only when you look back will you connect the dots. I feel like that's what's happened to me over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, where I've been able to really understand how the impact of that curiosity in my teenage years around psychology and humanity, the work that I'd done in the creative space after that, and then technology and innovation, how all of those things have been able to come together in the work that I do now. And the pivots that I made between those different points, actually why they were important steps on that journey. So and it's only now that it all makes sense. And at the time, you can't really see those correlations or those dots connect until you look back and you think, actually, that psychology, that understanding of humanity has always been there in some way, shape, or form. And now it makes much more sense because I'm using it on a day-to-day basis in the work that I do.
Yeah, I think that's really an interesting point, because there's a lot of stuff out there now, isn't there? Like, I don't know about, I guess people listening to this podcast will have a similar Instagram or social media feed to myself, where it's probably lots of self-development stuff, lots of things around spirituality, and I just see this thing all the time, like, you need to have your why, you need to have a purpose, you need to know this, you need to know that. And what's interesting is I feel like partly that has scuppered me a little bit this year, because I started thinking like, oh, I'm not professional enough in my business, and I don't have my niche completely worked out, and I don't have my messaging completely worked out, I don't have all this stuff. And it kind of stopped me from doing things a little bit, because I thought, oh, until I've got all this stuff, And then I actually became curious about it, because I thought, okay, well, why are you sort of, and I thought, it doesn't matter. And I listened to this book. I can't remember the author now. A friend of mine recommended it to me, and it's called Rich as Fuck. And in that book, the woman who wrote it, and sorry, whoever wrote it, I can't remember your name off the top of my head. I didn't realise I was going to talk about this. She shares about just leaning into your intuition and just chucking things out there. And that's kind of what I did at the beginning of my business. I just sort of thought, oh, I'm going to do this, and then I'd do it, and I'm going to do that. And it was very much the same with the podcast. I just thought, I love talking to people, I should make a podcast, and then I just made it, and here we are, right? I didn't overthink it. I didn't sit there for hours thinking like, who's my ideal listener, who's this? I just thought, I love having interesting conversations with people. Yeah. Wouldn't that be great to share those interesting conversations with other people? And that was it, really. There wasn't too much that went into it. And I think this whole thing around feeling like you have to have everything worked out, and especially for people that are younger listeners, I remember around sort of 24, 25 feeling like I didn't have it all worked out, and that maybe there was something wrong with me, because everybody else seemed to know what they wanted to do and where they were going in life and what they were doing, and I was sort of drifting a bit. And actually, now that I look back, and I was testing and curious and interested in all these different topics, and actually now I look back, I'm exactly the same as you. I'm like, oh my God, I did, music production when I was like, I don't know, 17. But now that I do gong bars and sound therapy, and I'm recording a podcast, all that stuff that I learned back then about how to make things sound good is applicable. I didn't know that was going to be applicable. When I was in my 20s, I thought, oh no, you've wasted all that time at college. Yeah. But now it is applicable. And then, all these things that I did around event management and planning. And now when I do my own retreats and when I do my own events, all that stuff that I thought back then, oh no, I've wasted my time and now I'm starting something new, it all feeds back in.
It does.
Yeah. And what do you think have been your threads then, apart from why people do what they do and that kind of psychology piece? Is there other threads, like personal threads, that you're like, oh, that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was, and still am, very drawn to creativity. My dad was always very, very creative. And so I grew up in a creative household, and that was absolutely one of the motivating factors for going to university, studying a design degree and entering into the creative industries. And when I left the creative industries after a decade, I was quite burnt out, and I thought, I might never go back into the industry. I'd like to sort of explore what's next. But what's really interesting is that now, having my own business and doing the work that I do is the most creative I have ever been. And even though I'm not sort of in the creative industry, as in working for an agency or a consultancy in the industry, I'm using all of that creativity in the work that I do, in the way I design things, in as you described, Rachel, in all the different things you do. You can see how those threads correlate in many different ways. So creativity, absolutely, and also technology. I remember when I was at school being one of the only girls that took computer studies at GCSE, showing my age now. But I knew very early on back then that technology was going to be really important in the world. And I'm glad I did and followed that passion, because I got to work quite a bit in the technology and innovation space as well. And I think that understanding and awareness in terms of, all of the different ways we interact with technology and how it can help, how it can get in the way, all of those things, again, come to fruition in the work that I do now. So yeah, absolutely. Those two threads pulled all the way through. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting as well, isn't it? I mean, where do you see technology going?
That's a big question, Rachel.
I know.
Well, it's everywhere, and it's not going away.
No.
And so in many ways, it's a reflection of humanity. We are building technology in our own image in many ways. And I think the more that we can understand it, the power of technology, what it can do, how it can understand us in many ways better than we understand ourselves, all of those things, the more awareness that we have around all of this, the better. But I believe that with everything in life, the more aware we are, the more we're able to ask informed questions, know the right questions to ask that can help us make the right decisions for ourselves.
I think that's a key point, knowing the right questions to ask.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this stuff people don't understand.
Yeah.
And I think that, if you don't know the right questions to ask, I've definitely found this in my life where I've thought, could have worked that out if I'd have asked that. But you don't know until afterwards. And I think that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's interesting at the moment. I don't know if you've seen, I imagine most people have seen these kind of AI image portraits that everyone's putting up all over social media and stuff like that. And I've seen this sort of, even just in the last 6 months, this kind of blowing up of AI in business, especially where you can now in Canva, when you're doing a design in Canva, this is new, you can tell it what you want the image to be and it will create the image for you. So you could say I want a hedgehog tap dancing on a piece of bread. And it will make the... I don't know why. That's a big insight into my brain right there, isn't it? I don't know why. I don't know why that was the example I used. But, you can literally ask it and then it will just create an image for you. And I just think the same with copy. There's now, is it called Jasper, I think it's called, or something, that writes copy for you based on all the copy that's out on the internet. How do you think that is going to affect people's creativity and our own creativity? Because I was thinking about this and I was like, I personally really enjoy the process of writing. I actually really like to think of a topic and write. And for those that, obviously I haven't written for a while, #long COVID has eaten all my energy, but I was writing a daily email and people were saying, well, how do you do that? And how do you know what to write about? And I'm like, I really enjoy doing it. And I'm really looking forward to getting back to it soon. But how do you think that's going to affect creativity? Because realistically, I personally think everybody's creative. but I think some people lean into it in different ways. So some people might be creative in the way that they cook. Some people might actually be incredible portrait painters, or be able to make beautiful music, or, you know, but I think everybody's creative to an extent. But some of those skills, you know, creative writing or creating imagery, if AI can do it for us, how do you, like, I'm just, this is my curiosity coming up, but I'm just curious to think, how do you think that's going to affect, you know, the world in general, when things that could have been specific skills for only certain people, they can access just by typing into a computer?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things that are coming up for me in that question that you asked, Rachel, which is, the first one is around, well, what is creativity? Because that word is so broad. And as you've just described, it can mean so many different things to different people. So it's a broad term, isn't it? And so it has that ability to flex and shape in whatever way I believe is creative. So that's one part of it. The second component, in terms of the ability to be able to create things through technology, kind of in a blink of an eye, for me, that democratizes creativity. That gives us a different way of being creative. It's sort of supercharging creativity, but through a technology lens. And whilst that in one way takes us away from our own creativity, we have the choice as to whether we want to use that as a way of enabling us to be more creative, or we prefer to tap into our own creativity and use that as a way of expressing our creativity. So I see it in many different ways. I think it can be really helpful if we want to get more things out there, be more creative, and use technology as an amplification of that. Or, you know, we can choose not to and express our own creativity, and that be the unique expression of who we are and how we want to show up in the world. I think it depends on the individual. It depends on the context. It depends on what you want the outcome to be.
Yeah, because it's interesting. I was like, oh, that could be quite cool, you know, like, because time is obviously quite, for anyone that's an entrepreneur or a leader listening to this, time is obviously one of our tricky topics for most of us, right? It's like, I'm just one person, and there's recording, editing. I do my delivery of all my like therapy clients. Then I have, you know, the gong bars and events and things that I do, and the retreats, and then it's all the marketing and planning and setting up at the ticket. There's so many different elements, and not even to mention all your invoicing and tax stuff. And there's so many different things to do that actually sometimes it's like, oh, well, if I could get something to create 6 blog posts for me a month, and I don't have to write them, and they can be created, and I just edit them down and put them into my own language, that could save me a lot of time. But I kind of, part of me feels a bit, not sad, but, you know, when you're like, oh, wouldn't it be, not, you know, isn't it better to write it yourself? Because I do think that sometimes we're, in terms of our mental and emotional well-being, and in terms of our connection to things like curiosity and creativity, if we're constantly outsourcing, and I think people do this a lot with their thoughts, with their feelings, with everything, we kind of outsource it. So it's like, well, what do you think? And we wait to see if someone confirms what we think to decide whether we're correct or not. How do you feel about that? You know, we wait to see people's responses to decide if our feelings are valid and those kinds of things. And then we're going to be outsourcing our creativity to AI. And we're continually putting things outside of ourselves instead of allowing that to come from within. And I just wonder what effects that will have overall, you know. And similarly with these AI imagery, I'm just like, and filters, you know, I'm guilty of it. I use filters on things. I don't always like the way that I look on when I'm doing video or things like that. And you think, I wonder what effect that's going to have long term, because when somebody's writing from the heart and you read that piece of writing, I feel like there's a connection there.
Absolutely.
And if it's AI writing it, I don't know, it's almost like this sort of slight distrust. Do you know, like, because are you going to say, like, if I got AI to write a blog post, would I then put that on my website as if it was my writing, but I didn't write it? And then people are going to be like, wow, Rachel's this incredible writer. And actually, it's not true. And I wonder if it builds this kind of slight mistrust in the world. Like, do I really look like this, or is this a filter? Do I really sound like this, or is this some kind of audio thing? You know, there's AI now that can take a photo and make a video and it have the same sounding voice as somebody, but you just typed out what you wanted them to say. So there's this kind of like interesting thing. And again, like, curious, right, about how does that affect humanity in terms of like our trust of other people.
I mean, big questions in there.
I know, I didn't realise this is where the conversation was going to
go. The first thing that springs to mind around the example that you shared of writing is AI takes data from all the existing data sources that are available, and all of those existing data sources have, up to this point, or the fairly recent past, have been created by humans. So it is accessing the behavior, the styles from humanity to this point. So from one perspective, I hear what you're saying around the trust piece, and if something is written by technology, you know, does it have that authenticity? Can it connect emotionally? And all of those things that are innate to us as human beings that make us, you know, a different species to every other living creature on this planet. But AI is taking information from what we have already created. So by its nature, it can.
But then you imagine then, okay, in 10 years' time, when AI's created all the stuff and it's no longer coming from humanity, it's coming from regurgitated AI version of it. It's just, it's interesting. Anyway, I could... I've gone off on a massive diversion to what we said we were going to talk about.
This is what curiosity does, though, doesn't
it?
It helps us to explore different paths. It taps into our creativity. It enables you to have a really different conversation, and, you know, that can only be a good thing.
How do you define curiosity for yourself?
Oh, great question. I define curiosity as a desire to explore, to discover, to find out more, to learn. And it's something that is active. You're not passive. You're not just receiving of information and taking things on face value. With curiosity, you are exploring. You know, and what's wonderful about curiosity, I read a fantastic book called Curious by Ian Leslie. It's in my bookshelf over there. It's one of my favorite books. And in this book, he talks about curiosity, saying that it is the fourth drive, and it is what defines us from all other living creatures on the planet. You know, all living creatures need food, shelter, sex. Humans have a fourth drive after those three, which is curiosity. And when I read that, I thought, wow, that is so interesting. But not only that, the reason why it's so interesting, and the reason why our lifelong quest to sort of understand the why, where it comes from, is in that fourth drive, the curious drive. It's why we are always really interested in understanding the purpose of things. We want to know the why. We want to know what sits behind something, because it quenches our thirst for information. Within movies, they have information gaps in plots, don't they? And the human brain is always trying to work out, why is this person doing that? Why are they doing that? And connect the dots. And that's what makes movies so engaging and so gripping. It plays to that fourth human drive around curiosity. And I find that fascinating. And what I also find fascinating around curiosity is I'm doing a lot in the space around courage at the moment. working with leadership teams, and I'm hearing it a lot that people aren't necessarily as courageous, or dealing with those difficult conversations that they need to. And actually, when I put it the curiosity lens on through that, it is about, when you're curious about something, it can move you through and past fear, which is the thing that gets in the way, that stops us from being courageous and acting with courage. And so
absolutely, 100% agree with that. And I think something that came up for me today, actually, I had supervision. So I have, for people that don't know what supervision is, when you're a therapist, you have a supervisor who you can get advice from, I guess, on how you're dealing with certain things with clients, that kind of thing. So it makes you a better therapist. And sometimes there's not really anything to check in on, so it might end up being an EFT session, for me. And one of the things that came up was around responsibility. And I think the courage piece and the responsibility piece are massively kind of interlinked. And I was saying about how I'd started to get into these narratives. And again, this is the curiosity piece, right? I'm always curious about that self-awareness piece for myself, of why I'm doing things that I'm doing, why I'm saying things that I'm saying. And I'd noticed these kind of stories or narratives that I've started creating around long COVID, for example. Well, I can't do that because of this, and I've had no energy. And, and it's quite, dare I even say it, victim space of like, poor me. And it is, I mean, for anyone that's got it as well, like, it's shit, isn't it? So let's be real, it's been shit. But I'm coming out the other side of it now, and I'm still having this same narrative. And there's that fear piece where I'm like, I'm scared to do things in case I get too tired and then I can't keep up, in case I, and this kind of responsibility around the narrative of ADHD. Obviously, I'm still on the wait list. It's been over 2 years now, but we'll see what happens. And similar narratives around that. Well, I can't focus and I get distracted easily, and that's why I can't finish projects, and that's why this and that's why that. And what was interesting was my supervisor said, how about you take some responsibility for your thoughts and behaviour? And I suddenly had this like, penny drop thing where I was like, oh my God, because even if I am neurodiverse, which I probably am, let's be real, so what? Just don't try and fit yourself into a neurotypical square then, because it will never work. Just carry on being a little bit kooky and do things your own way, and don't give yourself a hard time about it, and everything's going to be cool. And with the long COVID thing, like, stop feeling like you can't do anything about it. You're doing all the things that you can. You're resting. I've been implementing, for anyone that's interested, I've written a little sheet that you can see different supplements, physio stuff, like pretty much anything that I can do, I'm actually doing. So I'm taking responsibility for that piece, the physical piece, but I've not been courageous in my thought piece around it. And that's going to, now I need to start saying, no, I'm not going to talk about myself in that way anymore. I'm just going to say, I'm healed. I'm let's go. Like, and see, again, be curious about the fact and courageous about the fact that you can change those thought processes and how you talk about yourself and the narrative that you create around things, and that can shift your perspective massively. And I think for leaders and entrepreneurs and people like that, there's a lot of fear around at the moment, right? And there's a lot of difficult conversations that need to be had. People are still, I think, I still can't believe it's nearly 2023. It feels like 2019 was like yesterday. And you're like, hang on a minute, how many years? How many years is that? And so I think a lot of people are still in this kind of feeling quite burnt out, feeling stressed and exhausted. And those conversations around courage, curiosity, responsibility probably need to be had, right? Because if we can all take a bit more personal responsibility, there's things habits that I've probably picked up or dropped, that I need to sort that balance out again for myself, and nobody else can do that for me apart from me.
And it's harder. It's harder the more that we work virtually and remotely. It's very easy to not show up, to hide behind the screen. And so as leaders, we can refrain from having those difficult conversations because we're not facing that person every single day in the office like we would have been 3 or 4 years ago. So there's a greater level of anonymity and that ability to hide behind the screen, have a day's worth of meetings on end, so it's impossible to get into your diary. So yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting time right now.
I would love to know, what has been your biggest learning in terms of like leaning into curiosity for you?
Oh, my biggest learning. So a couple of things are coming up for me around that. The first one is building on that point from earlier, how curiosity can help move you through fear. And if you're curious about what's showing up for you and why it's happening, that can help move you past the fear, because the fear will hold you back. And I say that in relation to confidence. I say it in relation to whatever those obstacles are that you're facing. Use curiosity. Get curious to explore in yourself, like, what are those, why is this showing up like this, why am I doing this, like, and just look at it from that perspective. I would also say the other thing is getting curious around the rhythms of nature. So one of the things that I've come to learn, which I find utterly fascinating, is that everything in life is cycles and rhythms. And even if I look back at my own career, there are 4-year cycles. When you look at it holistically, I identified that actually my career trajectory, loads of brilliant highs, some lows, some painful lows, and in that journey, when you look at it at bird's eye view, there are patterns and cycles. The same within life. If we think about, the developmental stages of human beings, the life stages, there are certain patterns, aren't there, in terms of, cycles of life, and the same in nature, the same in the universe. And that, for me, when I learned that was a really defining moment, because when you're in those moments where things are really hard and it's very difficult to move through them, actually knowing that it's just part of a cycle and that it's not going to stay like that forever is really reassuring.
Yeah, I've massively felt that with, for anyone that knows me personally, I am normally full of energy, probably too much energy, like spare, rushing around, 20 projects happening at once, and I love my life that way. I've always been that way. And sometimes I do get burnt out, and that's cool, whatever, I'll have a little rest and then I'm back on it. But it's really taught me similar things. Somebody said to me about the long COVID, maybe you're just in your winter. And I was like, what? And then when I thought about it, I was like, yeah, just embrace it. Just be like, okay, cool. This is a rest period. Don't overthink it. Don't beat yourself up because you're not able to do all the things that you used to be able to do. Just lean into rest. Just imagine you're hibernating. Just, let your body do what it needs to do. Let your mind do what it needs to do, and just repair and heal. And you'll come out and it'll be spring, and you'll get excited because you'll start seeing the little buds, of your life starting to spring up, and then the flowers will come, and then you'll go back again into autumn and winter. And I was like, And the same with business, I think I saw, I never know how to say this word. Is it meme or meme?
Meme. I say meme.
Me too, but when you're like, am I just really old? Because I don't think that's what everyone calls it. Anyway, and it said, what did it say? It was something like, your best days are not your baseline, or something like that. Yeah. And I suddenly was like, I do that to myself. Like, you'll have a week where you're like bang it's amazing.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah.
Nailed
Love
all
those
your
weeks.
nailed all your client sessions, like designed this, got that out, bomb, bomb, bomb,
Yeah.
tick, 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 dopamine hit from every like tick on your to-do list, smashing through stuff, and you're like, yeah. And then the
Definitely.
next week you're tired. But instead
Yeah.
of just going, oh, I'm tired because I
Yeah.
had a really effective, busy,
Yeah.
productive week last week, and now maybe my body's like, girl, you need to rest. I'm
Yeah.
like, I should be delivering like that all the time, and it's just
No.
not true. That's your peak performance. That's your
Yeah.
9-second
Yeah.
100-meter run.
Exactly
You know,
that.
and
Yeah.
I think when we think about life in that way, it makes it much
Yeah.
easier when we can tune into the cycles. But I also think we have to be a little bit cautious. I'd love to know your opinion on this.
Mm.
I used to be the kind of person who would be like, oh, it's because I'm a Pisces. That's why I'm a bit flaky. Oh, it's full moon. That's why this. Oh, it's Mercury retrograde. So that's why that. Oh, now Jupiter's in retrograde, right? And I would kind of, I guess, blame some of my stuff on like planets or my period or this or that. And actually, as I've got older, I've really started to, again, because I try and have this thing in my head, you know, radical responsibility. Like, what can I take responsibility for? I can't take responsibility for the fact I might have a really painful period, for example, but I could get myself a hot water bottle, maybe take some things out of my diary, maybe make myself a nice warm drink, maybe take some painkillers if that's needed. You know, I've got this, in fact, anybody, well, check you're not allergic, all that stuff. Sorry, I'm not prescribing. But I make this oil that is just like a game changer out of, you need a carrier oil. I think I used almond. I can't remember. I made it ages ago. And then I put in it peppermint oil and clary sage oil. And I put it in a roller bottle and I roll it over my lower belly area when I've got cramps. It's a game changer. So just sharing that for you guys at home. I don't really have a recipe. I just chuck it in. So I imagine it's about 5 drops of each essential oil to a thing of carrier oil. I'm not an essential oil expert, but yeah, that's definitely helps as well. And they're things that I can take responsibility in within that.
Yeah.
And I think I see this quite a lot on social media of people kind of going, oh, you know, like now it's Mercury retrograde, we're in the shadow period. So that means, oh, we're not allowed to do any promotions, sign any contracts, you know. But Mercury retrograde happens 3 times a year and can take like, that knocks out like 3 or 4 months of your year. And then every month there's a full moon. And so I think it's important to look at these cycles.
Yeah.
And to be, again, like curious about the cycles, but to also be courageous and take responsibility for what we can do to help ourselves within those things, rather than just going, oh, well, I can't, I'll have to start in 3 months because it's Mercury retrograde.
Yeah.
It's like,
and it's also about recognizing what's going on when we give our responsibility away in those examples that you've just shared, and the fact that the brain has a whole bunch of different biases, 175 different cognitive biases that we have as human beings. And often in those examples that you shared, what's showing up is confirmation bias. So we believe in something, therefore our thoughts and our feelings around things, we are confirming that belief system with that bias. And so again, so much of all of this is around awareness.
Yeah.
Being aware of what's showing up, why it's happening, that self-awareness piece, and then being able to make the right decisions that are going to help you, give you the highest probability of success, or give you the outcomes that you're looking for.
Yeah, I really feel that as well, because I think curiosity massively allows us to dive into that awareness piece. You know, rather than kind of going, oh, well, it's obviously this, being able to go, why am I thinking that way? Why am I feeling that way? What kinds of things could I do to improve my position with this situation or this thought or this emotion? And, you know, really having that kind of casual curiosity about things has definitely helped me improve my mental health and my emotional well-being. day to day. Well, you know, and sometimes you're in it and you get a bit stuck, but you need to just slip out, don't you, and come into that more observer view, and then it's easier to see.
Most of the time we're on autopilot.
Tell me about it.
We're not even creating that consciousness or awareness. We're just going about what we're doing without really thinking about it very much.
Yeah.
And the brain rewards us for predictability, for staying in the comfort zone, all of those things. So it's, you know, and the brain takes up so much energy. I think it's something like 20% of the energy that we use in our body goes to the brain. So any way in which we can conserve energy, the brain will try and do it. So that autopilot piece means that we're often just going around without even creating this awareness or being conscious about the decisions or, you know, what we're doing. We're in autopilot.
So true. Part of this podcast is obviously a bit of a love letter to a younger you. If you could go back in time and kind of talk to young Claire, who's, you know, coming up through the world, if you like, what piece of advice would you give to her?
Going back to my younger self, I would share the wisdom and insight around fear. And I would say fear is going to hold you back if you let it. And the way to overcome that is to do what feels counterintuitive. So when we experience fear, it felt like a threat, and the brain works on threat and reward. We are the reward, as you mentioned earlier, the dopamine hits, we move towards something. Reward, we want to move away from it. And so when we feel fear about anything in life, it makes us want to move away. And so the advice that I would give my younger self is to, when you feel that fear, move towards it and see it for what it is. It's a way of keeping you safe from any risk, psychological risk, emotional risk, vulnerability, you know, keeping you playing small and within your comfort zone. And it comes back to my point that I mentioned earlier around the brain conserving energy. The brain wants to conserve energy, so will want to keep us in our comfort zone. But the way that you can overcome that is by recognizing what's going on, but also moving towards the fear. Do those things that make you feel uncomfortable. Step into your power, into your courage. And that's where you expand your comfort zone, get into the growth learning zone, and are able to fulfill your potential. But it's only through that process, that counterintuitive process of moving towards something that you want to move away from, that you can achieve the things that you want. So that's what I would go back and tell my younger self.
Wow. Do you think she'd
I wish I'd have learned that.
Do you think she'd like get it?
That's a great question. I think my younger self would go, yeah, but that's easy for you to say, you know, because you've got the experience. It's much harder. But I would positively encourage her to take baby steps rather than massive leaps. Baby steps, because those baby steps become so compounded over time. The more baby steps that you take, the bigger the leaps over time you will actually achieve.
100% what I talk about in Happy Habits Club. You know, it's like you might think that meditating for 5 minutes 3 times a week is like pointless, that you need to do an hour a day or, you know, whatever. But over time, it's like compound interest in the bank, isn't it? If you just put £1 a week away in the bank, again, you'd probably think £1 a week. What am I going to be saving? Like 50 quid a year? Like with inflation, that's nothing. But if you did that every week since you were born, you know, I don't know the maths. I make up these analogies and then don't have the maths to back it up. But it would be a lot of money by the time you were 60 or 65, right? And it's the same with your habits. It's like these small incremental changes that you can make over time really start to compound. And then what you'll notice is when that habit becomes, you know, I never used to make my bed, for example. I don't get out of bed without making my bed now, but I don't even think about it. It's an automatic habit. So these things that start to creep in. There's other habits that I really have to work hard at. Like, I love meditation. I think it's one of the most incredible tools that I have in my arsenal, but I never want to meditate. I'm not one of those people that thinks, you know, I'm going to sit and meditate. Yay. I'm like, oh, for God, you know, afterwards, I always feel good. It's like going to and the same with the gym, you know, I love going to the gym after I've been, but before, anything else is more important. And so there's some habits that even now, even though it's been years that I've been trying to ingrain those habits, I have to like nail them off. But there's other ones like making my bed, eating completely different nutrition. I don't know, I'm trying to think. There's so many now that are just like automatic that I don't have to think about. And I think that's really important for people to realise as well, that often we overestimate what we can do in a day and underestimate what can happen in a year with like incremental changes.
And that habit piece, just to build on what you were saying, Rachel, the thought habits are the most powerful way of driving that behavior, the behavior that we want. And the morning habits, and I know you and I have talked about some morning rituals in our conversations, but one of the things that actually really helps me in the morning is to ask myself the question, what do I need to believe to create a great outcome today? Ooh. And that is the first question when I'm in the shower, no matter how I'm feeling. Often I'm feeling very tired, but that is the first question I ask myself. How do I want to feel? What do I need to believe today to create the best outcome?
That's an amazing question to work with.
Yeah.
I love working with questioning. Yeah. I use that a lot in my own practice. And I think definitely the thought thing, that's an automatic practice for me now. When I think negatively about myself, I automatically, because I've been doing this for years, if I notice myself saying something negative about myself, I will literally say, this is an old thought pattern, I no longer need it, I choose to believe, and then flip the thought and repeat that as an affirmation over and over again for about 3 minutes after I've said the negative thing, because I'm just not willing to talk to myself negatively anymore. But I noticed more recently, it was actually at Soho Works, I was working with somebody and we couldn't use the hot water tap. You know, those taps, they're funny, aren't they? And I've got the knack of it. And so I said to this girl, you know, here, and I sort of did the tap, and she said, oh, you know, you're really good at that. And my response was something along the lines of, oh, I can't run my own business, but I can work a tap.
Where did that come from?
I don't know. And I was like, oh my God. And I was with my friend Alex and I started laughing. I went, right, that is unacceptable. And I apologized to myself in my head. I was like, I'm sorry that I said that about you. And then I was like, you know, repeating to myself like this, an old thought pattern, I don't know why. And I realized that I have this real habit, and this is just a habit of life, of real self-deprecation in front of other people. Like to really put myself down for no apparent reason. It's bizarre. So that's something that I'm trying to work on at the moment.
Yeah, and it's moving those thoughts from being passive into actually being purposeful. And that is the conscious bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of creating that conscious awareness.
Yeah, it is. And sometimes it's really tricky. Because I was like, I don't know if I would have noticed that if I wasn't with Alex. But because I was with Alex, I don't know why, I just sort of like thought, wow, she would never say that. I like, do you know, like it was just one of those weird things. And I think sometimes it is quite tricky. And it took me a long time to really notice my thoughts. But again, meditation, you know, it is a great help with that. What do you wish you'd known over your life? What one thing do you wish you'd known?
So one of the biggest things that I've learned over the years is that even when you're faced with the greatest of uncertainties and pain, that you have all of the resources already inside of you to be able to handle those things. Even if you have no idea how on earth you're going to get through it, you've got it. You've got it all there in you. And in those moments of absolute fear and uncertainty, that's actually when we become the most resourceful, the most creative, the most innovative, the most amazing human beings we are, because we are all inbuilt with that survival instinct. And in that survival instinct are all of those tools to equip us to get through anything. And come out the other side.
I was writing a piece the other day, and in it I was like, one of the things that got me through, like when I was really depressed and really unwell, and was somebody had said to me, I think it's a Winston Churchill quote, which I don't think I'm the biggest fan of Winston Churchill, but anyway, whatever. It was a helpful quote, and it said, if you're going through hell, keep going.
And
that's the thing, isn't it? I think you will come out, you will definitely come out the other side if you change your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, whatever. You will come out the other side. But if you aren't making those changes, you're going to become stuck in that same loop, and things aren't going to change. So that's everything you need is already within you, 100%. That's really good. That's a really good piece of what do you wish you'd know.
Learn the hard way on that one.
I mean, still learning.
Definitely.
I always ask everyone as well, I mean, is there anything else that you would like to share? Maybe any questions that you wish that I'd asked, anything that you think is a little nugget of wisdom that might have come up over the chat before we sign off?
So around the curiosity piece, so there have been a couple of times across my life where I've been faced with a lot of uncertainty, and one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given was to stay in the emergence phase for as long as you can. Pay attention to the things that you're naturally drawn towards that pique your curiosity, because in that sort of interest will be clues for the things that are going to be important for you on the road ahead, and you won't know why or how at that point, but pay attention to those things and explore and discover and pique your curiosity and move towards them. I would say that's probably one of the things I would say. And one other quote that's been particularly poignant for me over the years is one by William Blake, and he says, in the universe there are knowns and there are unknowns, and in between there are doors. So in those moments of uncertainty, know that space is there for you, because there are other things that are going to present themselves that are going to be really important on your journey ahead. So they're probably my two things.
One thing that I would like to ask, actually, that I think would be really helpful for listeners is if you don't feel that you're naturally very curious, what are some ways that you can kind of tune in? Because it's all well and good, isn't it, saying be curious about your emotions. It's like, what? It's kind of like, what's the how behind that? What kind of practices or tools can people use to really start to connect to their personal curiosity, their personal creativity?
So the first one is to create an awareness around what is interesting to you. What's interesting? And it could be something small, it could be something massive, but just pay attention, create an awareness around that, and start from there.
Brilliant.
That's it. Start from there.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for coming. I've loved this conversation. It's gone in big segues. I didn't realise it was going to go in. So I think it's definitely going to provide lots of joy to people listening. And thank you so much for coming and sharing and being open. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure.
I will share your links, but how do people get in touch if they want to find out more about you or Imagine Beyond?
So visit my website, which is imagine-beyond.co.uk. That's where you can contact me. You can read a bit more about what I'm doing. And that's probably the best place, the easiest place to find me.
Perfect.
Imagine-beyond.co.uk.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And to all the listeners, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy these podcasts and you want to help us reach more people, please do feel free to share on whatever platform, whether you're listening on YouTube, click that subscribe button so that you get a notification every time we have a new episode. If you're listening on your favourite podcast platform, please do leave us a review. It really does help us to reach more people. And I love to hear your feedback, you know, whether it's positive or there's things that you think we could change to make it better for you. I will be back very shortly with another episode. Thank you so much for listening. Much love.
We hope you've enjoyed listening as much as Rachael enjoys making this podcast. Why not share it with a friend? And if you really love it, drop us a review on Apple Podcasts, as it really helps us reach and inspire more people. Thanks for listening.